Hello and welcome to the Yogi and the Blonde podcast with the Yogi
Me, Nadia.
and the Blonde, me, Michelle.
Show.
Yay! Welcome back to our podcast. Today we are talking about a subject which is very dear to both of our hearts and something that really, I guess, prompted us to decide to do an episode about this. I had a client the other day. I was training her. She is so strong. She has really improved her strength over the course of the year. And she said to me, she'd recently been to Korea, South Korea, on holiday. Nice. And they tend to sit on the floor a lot when they're eating, or if she went for a coffee, they tend to have a lot of floor sitting. She was like, oh my God, I can leg press 250 kilos. Yet I struggled to sit down on the floor to have my lunch in South Korea. And I struggled to get back up again. So that led us to having a conversation. And we wanted to record a podcast about the importance of mobility. And obviously, as part of our duo, we have a Yogi on the team as well.
Woo-hoo!
So I think something when we started talking about mobility, it can often get mixed up and confused with yoga. So I guess we just kind of wanted to break down what it is, what our experiences are with mobility training, and also how it does differ from yoga as well.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because so working at Maria here at Maria Hot Springs in the South Island in New Zealand, I have created we've got these wellness activities where we do hot cold therapy, which is like sauna, cold plunge kind of thing, and we educate people. And then I've got classes here in the studio, but it's interesting because it's the yoga studio, but I've decided with one of the co-owners, we've decided that we don't want just yoga, and so I'm bringing in my PT side of things. So we have a few fitness classes, we have myofascia release, we've got yoga Pilates, so that's like with Pilates based stuff, mat. Then I've got one is mobility in there, and yoga and different types of like yoga, like we've got meditation and various things. And it's interesting because I'm really enjoying it now because all of these are really, really important to do. It's not one that's better than the other. They all have actually a purpose for it. And same thing with a different type of workouts. It's not one that's better than the other. They all have a purpose. They all serve a purpose. So it's important to create a balance with it. And I think this is what I love about this new schedule of the activities in the class, in the studio, is because it's not just yoga. And don't get me wrong, I'm a yogi and I love teaching yoga, but they intertwine together. Now, when we were discussing, because both Michelle and I have been playing around with this online app of doing some mobility, and we've been playing it around just for our own benefits as well for this podcast. And we thought, well, what's the purpose of mobility? And when you think about it, as a personal trainer, as a coach, you think, why practice mobility? Well, the difference between mobility and yoga is interesting because mobility is about using it's about the strength in the range of motion. So mobility exercises are designed to strengthen the muscle in an extended and varied range, providing stability through your movement. So this helps protect the joints and supports overall flexibility. So without mobility helps with flexibility. So I remember in yoga, when I first started doing my yoga teacher training course, we talked about different body types. You'd have the stiff, strong body. You'd have a very flexible, soft body. And a lot of the times the flexible, soft body that actually naturally bend really easily like elastic band don't have the strength. And those type of bodies, sometimes we need to be very mindful and approach in a strength type of yoga session to make sure that body doesn't actually hurt their ligaments and joints because they don't have the strength around it. So it's quite fascinating. You might see someone that's quite naturally flexible, but they won't have the strength. So like a girl that I did my studies with, just this beautiful little soul, and she was like a rubber band. And it was interesting because when I would adjust her, I felt how soft she was. And what I meant by soft is the muscle was like there was no strength in that, and she was aware of it. And it was quite cool because we would be adjusting each other's bodies in the yoga poses and become aware of the body. Have you ever noticed that, Michelle? I don't know if you adjust or anything like that with your clients, but
yeah, I've got a couple of clients that have hypermobility syndrome, so they can get into some really impressive looking positions but struggle to feel where the end of their range is because they don't have that strength in the ligaments to provide them with that stop. And it's funny how you were talking about that, because I guess at both ends of the spectrum of the person that you described, you've got that injury risk because you've got the strong person that doesn't have the supplety in the joints that probably is at risk of injury, and then you've got the person who's got all of that suppleness but they don't have the strength, and they're also at risk of injury as well. So it's interesting how you can have two opposite ends of the spectrum, but they both actually have that higher
there's always a risk
because they need the strength and they need the suppleness together, not one or the other. We need both.
Well, it's interesting though, because for me, my theory, this is my point of view, and just from my experience up to date, is that I find that it's important to have the mobility and the flexibility, and yoga needs both. Because when I teach yoga, I see a lot of people they think it's mobility because it's the stiffness because they can't step their foot through, but it's also strength, if you know what I mean.
100%.
So they say that, like, if that makes sense. But now let me just go back again. Let me just step back a little bit here. So when you're thinking about yoga and mobility, again, mobility is about exercises that are designed to strengthen the muscles in an extended, varied range. Not saying that yoga isn't, but there's a lot of mobility movements where you actually also use some kind of weight or some kind of weight resistant training with it. And actually, mobility, you can actually put that into your weight resistance training. So when you think about yoga, a lot of the time yoga is about a flow of movement. You still need strength, you still need mobility, but there's a different emphasis behind it than there is with mobility. But there's a lot of things that you do mobility wise that's quite similar to yoga as well. And then with yoga, it's about also that mind-body connection, if that makes sense. When you're moving with yoga, it's actually a physical meditation. Yoga is what they call an asana practice, which is a lot of people what they know yoga as, and that's the physical part of yoga. And that is actually a form of movement meditation. Now, when we go back into the mobility is also a way to help preventing stiffness and injuries. So does yoga, but in a different way, because we're activating the muscles here. We're engaging the muscles and making them strong as we create that range. And when you are doing mobility, you're actually isolating one part. You might be just working a shoulder. You might be just working the neck, the hips, one part of the spine, the pelvis. So it's a slightly different, but then you can actually, if you get to understand mobility, you can actually intertwine the yoga and the mobility together. Does that make sense?
As a person that doesn't do yoga, I definitely view yoga as the word flow that you said, a flowing movement, poses. I know that it's not flowing constantly because sometimes you're holding the poses, but it's kind of going through a series of poses that tend to have meanings associated with the whole meditation side of things. So That's kind of my perception of yoga. But of course, being in those positions helps with your mobility, and it helps to be more mobile to get into those positions as well. So yeah, when you're doing mobility training, you're not in any kind of flow state, you're not in any kind of meditation state.
Yeah.
But I guess you are taking your body through those ranges. So yeah, I definitely, like I said, as a non-yoga goer, I get where you're coming from the flow meditation side of things.
What's interesting is when you think about it, like one of the classes I teach is a myofascia class. And the myofascia, I use the balls, which is like foam rolling, but using balls. So that's isolating specific target areas. And when we do this, we do stuff that I would do in yoga. And so that's why to me, there's a lot of similarities in it. It's just the same thing as Pilates. When I do yoga Pilates, I get a lot of people going, oh, there's a lot of similarities with yoga and Pilates. There's obviously very massive, extreme differences, but in Pilates, when you look at a lot of the reformer stuff and the big reformer machine, not just the basic one, like the big boy, as I would call it, you need some good mobility through that as well. And our body's actually built to create mobility. So a lot of us just sit as we are sitting. If you're watching the video, if you're on YouTube or anything like that, you see both Michelle and I are sitting. But now I'm going to create a twist. And as I create that twist, that's using mobility because I'm using my spine, right? Now, that's also something you would do in yoga. But with yoga, you're connecting all these movements together. Now, because there's a lot of things that you would do in mobility, you'd also do in yoga. But also with this, with the mobility, you also creating more isolation movement, which is done differently. I don't know if I feel like I'm a bit like rambling here. So let me just see here. So let's go to when should you do mobility? Now, mobility is always beneficial. It's important to include mobility wherever possible. I like to use it at the beginning of a yoga class. I like to use it at the beginning of a workout and at the end of a workout as well. But I also like to add mobility within my workout. And so when we think about it, it's easily to implement throughout the day in various parts. You can be standing in a grocery store and doing some easy stuff with the neck, creating that isolation and creating that mobility at the same time. But at the same time, this is stuff that we do in yoga. Now, there's a lot of similarities because sometimes in mobility, you hold something. Sometimes in yoga, you also hold something. Sometimes when you're doing mobility work, you are tensing the body and isolating the movement to focus on one joint, like let's say, for example, your wrist, right? A lot of the times, if you're watching, when we think about the wrist, we start moving the elbow. But if we stop the elbow from moving and we just move the wrist, that's isolating the movement through that wrist. And so we're not dumping into another area. So I guess that would be probably, I think the best way to explain it in my own words is isolation of movement to a specific joint. And when we bring that isolation of that movement of that specific joint, then that means when you're doing yoga, you're going to actually be able to have better flow with it. You'll be able to move easier and you're going to have that flexibility. Because when we think about yoga, we think about muscle, right? A lot of people think about it's just the muscle, but we actually need also movement within that range of the joint as well. So
I think actually, just on that, you can kind of bring that into all training as well.
Yeah,
not
that's
just
why I was saying
yoga. Yeah, if you've got any kind of restrictions, I guess, that's going to impact your ability to do any type of movement. So if you had a restriction, for example, in your ankle, if you didn't have very good mobility through your ankle, that's going to affect your ability to do a squat movement, for example. So yeah.
And it'll actually have it'll also affect you from getting up off the ground as well.
Yeah. And I
Like
guess
you were talking about your client.
Yeah. For her, she definitely could improve all of her lower body mobility,
Yeah.
ankles, knees, and hips. But I guess that's the core thing. And bringing it back to PT, when we meet a new client, we'll often take them through a movement screening because we're looking for these types of restrictions. And it might be that somebody has pretty good mobility in their upper body. They can do a really nice overhead press. They've got that movement through their shoulder joints. But it might be that their ankle mobility sucks. And it could be that, just because you have bad ankle mobility, if you focus on your ankle mobility, you will improve. So it's something where you really can isolate different areas, and you might view yourself as somebody that has good mobility. You might say, yeah, I can move, but your right ankle is really tight for some reason. Maybe you've had an injury, and it's a funny thing how you can view yourself, and then when you actually break down to the individual joints, actually having a limitation in one of your joints can actually affect how you move in your whole body. So
yeah, and I see that when I do the mobility class. It's quite interesting because I target areas like your front hip flexors and your quads, your glutes and hips, and then outer hips, and then as well the spine and the shoulders. And it's quite interesting to see with doing that with the mobility, and then as well when I do the myofascia, because the myofascia, when we do the myofascia, is again we do a test range of movement and movement that you can actually do on its own without the myofascia as well. And it's quite interesting to see people to connect how when they do the myofascia release and then the mobility afterwards, because we do the mobility beforehand, then we do the myofascia, then we redo the mobility again, and it's fascinating to see how, wow, we've got a bit more range. And to me, that proves that it's not one thing that is the fixer, it's amalgamating all of them together. So again, with coming back to mobility, what you want to do is create tension, and it's a tension and joint isolation. So what's called the Kinstretch experience. You focus on generating tension through isolation movements, activating deeper muscle groups, and you're improving joint flexibility. So by isolating specific area, it actually brings awareness and control by helping you address the body's specific limitations, which is what Michelle was talking about. And this is really important for us to just do anything in life, even to lift something overhead. If you've got that limit movement to lift those arms, just your arms straight overhead without shrugging the shoulders up towards the ears. And if you're watching the video, I am doing some movement for those that are just listening.
You described it perfectly.
Yeah. And just think about where your range is, and knowing the difference of, okay, am I going past my range? Am I dumping into another area? That's also what mobility will bring into play, which then helps you in yoga as well. Now, do you think yoga and mobility complement each other by me just saying that?
100%. I think mobility complements everything, any type of training, and actually just living. Like you said, putting your arms overhead, that doesn't have to be with dumbbells in your hands. It doesn't have to be as part of a yoga movement. That could be putting something away
In
when
a
you've
cupboard.
got home from shopping in a cupboard. Like mobility benefits all areas of life.
Do you know what? I was watching, I watched this show on Netflix. What is it called? Frankie and Grace, Grace and Frankie. And I remember an episode where they're like in their 70s, right? And she was struggling to get off the toilet. And then again, that's like muscle activation and mobility at the same time.
Yeah. people often talk about, oh, I'm getting old, because they're struggling to get up. And it's not that you're old, it's just that you don't have the strength or the mobility in your joints to do the movement. So everything feels creaky. And we talked about when is the best time to do mobility. So some people wake up, depending on their mattress or their pillow or how they sleep, they can wake up and feel creaky as. And for some people, doing some mobility in the morning, first thing as soon as they get out of bed, is just a nice way to get all of the joints moving, just get rid of some of those tightnesses, and that can relieve them and set them up for the day. But if you don't have a mobility practice or a movement practice, then you're just going to go in through the rest of your day feeling creaky as and stiff and sore. And, that's when you start complaining about how old you're feeling. So often doing some movement can help you to feel less creaky and stiff and old.
And it doesn't have to be something that you need to be doing for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It could be just a few minutes. And if you do that again in the evening or once you come home from work as well, just like little snippets of it will make such a big difference. And it'll help with your mood. It'll help with you unwinding down after a day as well. Now, both practices, when you think about yoga mobility, one isn't better than the other. And Michelle and I've talked about this, and I've voiced myself on anything when it comes to health and wellness. Now, both practice offer a unique benefit, and they can really enhance one another. Like I said before, yoga provides that full body holistic experience, while mobility really hones in on specific ranges and strengths in those areas. Now, the mutual benefit is yoga can improve your mobility through like flowing sequences, while when you think about mobility exercises, actually helps you to access a fuller range of motion during the yoga poses. So together they create such a beautiful balance and approach to movement and strength as well. Now, yoga is a physical meditation, like I said. Just yoga is about connecting breath. You're going to move the movement with your breath, and also creates that self-awareness, mental presence, and self-connection. And it actually encourages that mindfulness in every movement. So you can actually bring that into your mobility practice as well, and you can intertwine the two together. People also say that yoga is like a rhythm and a flow. In yoga is like a dance, like the flow of a dance, really. It cultivates a sense of moving while meditating. And with it is the benefit of the mind, body, and spirit with yoga. And it's creating experience that's much more inner awareness, as it's about the physical flexibility. A lot of people think it's about the physical part. But when we think about it, sometimes yoga, we want to rush through it, but yoga teaches us to sit with that discomfort and find comfort with that discomfort and connect the breath with that. Anyway, that's a little bit of our thoughts on yoga and mobility. And one isn't better than the other, and they're actually a beautiful complement with each other. And it's just like strength training. I am big on strength training is really important for yoga, as yoga is important for strength training. It doesn't mean that you need to be doing yoga 5 times a week, mobility 5 times a week. But actually incorporating the two throughout the week. Let's say you add a bit of yoga once or twice a week, add mobility 3 times a week within your workout regime. It's perfect. And this is why you go and get PTs and coaches like Michelle and I to help you incorporate those mobility movements within your exercise. Wouldn't you say, Michelle?
Yeah, I've got a couple of mobility follow-alongs on my YouTube channel.
Nice.
Just so people can have a bit of movement. There's one that's just full body, just to get some movement in, which most of my clients will do ahead of one of our sessions.
Yep.
and hip mobility, because I've got a lot of people that are very stiff in the hips. Very common to be stiff in the hips, especially with our sedentary lives. So it's not uncommon for the hip joints to stiffen up. So I've got a hip specific mobility routine in there as well. So
nice. The program that I'm going to be rolling out, I've altered it. Like, they've got their workouts through the week, but once a week they do, one will be a mobility one week, the next week it'll be yoga, just for them to play around with and just experiment. And then I'll have also a some other ones that they can plug in if they want to do more and stuff like that. So it's quite fun when you can bring all this stuff into play. Hey, Michelle?
Absolutely. There's a space for all of it, and it all benefits each other. So
yeah.
This is why we love it. This is why we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I hope you guys got something from it. As always, make sure you share with a friend. Share with us in our social media. We are on Instagram. Put a comment down below, maybe on YouTube or Spotify, which is another spot where we are both on for this, our podcast. And just let us know. The more that we know what you guys think and what your thoughts are, and any feedback helps us to create more episodes that you guys want to hear, and hear us talk about our point of views and inputs. Anything else you want to finish off with there, Michelle, before we move on?
No, just keep on moving.
Cool. And I just wanted to point out to everybody, because Michelle spoke about sitting on the ground, both Michelle and I right now, while we do this podcast, every time we do it, we are sitting on the floor. We're both sitting on the floor. You can see that I'm like quite low. And Michelle, you can see blocks on the corner. That's just on the floor. So see, we're both sitting on the floor. So we're working our hips while we're recording a podcast.
You can do it all.
I just wanted to point that out, since we're talking about mobility and sitting on the floor and stuff.
Yeah, there we go. Mobility and practice.
Yeah. We've got to practice what we preach, man.
Exactly.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Ciao.